Hello, everyone. I'm Mackenzie Jacob, your host, and welcome back to Dressed Rehearsal, the podcast where Broadway meets fashion and we discuss personal style and the roles that shape us on stage and off. Today on Dressed Rehearsal, I'm joined by Grace Walker, a dramaturg, writer, content creator, and one of the most exciting voices pushing theater towards greater accessibility. She has built a following on social media as at Not Kristen Bell on TikTok, full of fellow theater lovers who are passionate about play development, disability representation, and community engagement in the arts. For those who don't know what a dramaturg is, it's essentially a collaborator who helps shape the story, context, and meaning of a piece of theater, someone who makes sure the work is resonant and intentional. What I love about Grace is that her personal style mirrors her theater taste, not mainstream, bold, and endlessly creative. She's also someone who doesn't wait around for opportunities. She makes them for herself. From her content creation to her dramaturgy, Grace has carved out her own lane in the theater world, and it's really inspiring to see how she keeps building space for herself and others. In this episode, we talk about how fashion can be its own kind of dramaturgy, a way of telling the world who you are, what you value, and how you see art. With Grace, it's all about authenticity, imagination, and making theater more accessible, stylish, and true to the people it serves. And welcome to the podcast, Grace Walker.
Hello! Woo! So excited to be here.
Well, we're so excited to have you. I just want to preface this episode by saying that Grace is one of the big reasons why this podcast even exists.
Oh my God, shut up.
No, it's true. So, for those of you who don't know, Grace and I were roommates for 2 years when I first moved to the city. And I feel like you were such a great sounding board and such like a supportive perspective in all of this. And you really like encouraged me to go after it and just do it. So, thank you, Grace, because without you, there would be no dress rehearsal.
Oh my God, you're so funny. No, we literally lived in the smallest apartment. Let's just preface the scene here.
Yeah,
We
set the
lived
scene.
in like tiny ass rooms in a
Yes.
midtown apartment. We literally, like, you always say this, you're like, you could put your arms out and you would touch both walls. Like, that's how small it was. So
Yes.
we literally went through so much together, and I so appreciate you for always going to the craziest shows with me. And I'm so excited that you made this podcast.
Well, I
It's
mean,
about damn time, honestly.
it's humble beginnings, but I feel like you have always been so like open about your artistry and just like if it doesn't exist, just make it happen. And I feel like that was such an inspiration. And so let's get into it.
Let's get into it, Mackenzie.
So we start out every episode with how did you get bit by the theater bug?
Okay, so like I think my mom signed me up for theater when I was really young because I was just a really anxious kid. I know that's super shocking to hear. So I started doing theater that way, but I will say I think the reason why I fell in love with theater, it was when I was a kid, I used to watch The Hills on MTV all the time. Like I was obsessed with that TV show. I know I was like really young when the show was first going on, so I shouldn't have been watching it really in the first place, but here I was doing it anyway. Lauren Conrad, Whitney Port, and Audrina Patridge were
Yes.
the hosts of Legally Blonde the musical. Essentially, they went to the musical. They were walking Bruiser down the aisle, and everybody was greeting them and all this stuff. And I remember seeing that on MTV, and I was like, "Oh, that's so interesting. They're at a musical for Legally Blonde." I hadn't even seen the movie yet, so I didn't even really know what the story was about. But I
You didn't
remember
know
watching the musical.
the cultural impact.
I had no idea. Like I was there along the ride and I really fell in love with the musical and I just thought it was so much fun. And I watched the TV show alongside it and I was just like, so I feel like for me, my entryway into theater was really like reality TV and then also like educational theater.
That's fascinating. One, because I never knew this about you. Two, like talk about the most niche pipeline to theater being the hills. Like I don't.
No, seriously.
And it's so interesting. You think about like Wicked being on Ugly Betty and like Legally Blonde, like The Search for Elle Woods. Like it does reach people that like otherwise wouldn't maybe have that immediate connection. And I'm curious, you grew up in California and did Broadway always feel really far away?
Totally. I mean, I remember my family and I went to New York and we saw Legally Blonde the musical on Broadway, and that was my first Broadway
As you
show. And my
should.
dad, he's always like, I remember like you were like your eyes changed colors, like you were so sort of obsessed with
You were
with
living
this
in
thing
black
on
and white,
stage.
and finally you've
Yeah.
gone color.
literally, like I saw Laura Bell Bundy walk on stage and I was like, that is for me. Like that is my culture. You know what I mean? I think for me, I mean, yeah, it always felt really far away. And I didn't grow up going to a lot of shows. Like I didn't really know much about theater as a I don't know, through performance. I guess I always just knew about theater like through cast albums and also like just doing it when I was a kid. But I didn't really know much about like performance until I really moved to like DC because I went to school at American University where I studied theater and public relations. I double majored in that, and that was really like a really great educational space for me where I got to see so much theater and a lot of political theater. And I don't know, but I remember growing up in LA and really thinking that like people were not producing plays anymore. Like I just didn't think that was a thing people were doing. I thought it was all about musicals all the time, and I thought the only plays that existed were plays written by like Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller, and then people just stopped writing plays after that. I don't know why I thought that because that literally sounds insane, right? The
Mhm.
idea that something could just die in that sort of fashion. But if we think about Broadway, especially, I don't know, when I was growing up, like there weren't a lot of new plays on Broadway stages. It was pretty much just like play revivals. And so it seemed like this dead art form that we were just reviving for the sake of, I don't know, getting a Tony.
I think that people look at LA and they think that it's such like an entertainment mecca, and they forget that like theater there is such a different experience. And I'm curious, like between growing up in LA and moving to DC and now living in New York, like all of those towns have such different theater scenes. And I'm curious like how each one has influenced your taste.
For sure. I mean, I think with LA theater is really spread apart. Like there's definitely a theater scene in LA. It's just it's so far away from where you are. If my family and I ever wanted to see a show, essentially we would have to go to like the Pantages, and that was so far away from us that a lot of times it just wasn't worth it. And I mean, my parents had, they had subscriptions, I think, to Center Theater Group by the time I was in high school because they knew I was interested in theater. And we saw Bent at Center Theater Group. And I remember thinking, that was one of the most transformative theater experiences that I had ever, been able to witness. And I really love that play. But that was really the only play that I really got to see. And so for me, I always sort of felt like I was out of the conversation of theater. I didn't always fully understand. Like I feel like there are people who grow up in New York who, I mean, the way they speak about theater, it's like it's just another world. You know what I mean? Like they have such a vocabulary for it that I didn't necessarily have.
For them, it's like a given. It's just a part of life and it's just something that they grew up on. And so when you move into that community, I think there's a lot of intimidation of like everyone has this historical knowledge and they're like encyclopedias of exactly what happened. And it's like
Sure.
that lens is great, but at the same time, there's so much value to like a refreshed new outside perspective that you can offer when you don't have the weight of all that's happened before.
Totally. And so, yeah, for me, I always felt like an outsider approaching theater. And I think LA was a huge reason as to why I felt that way. And then when I came to DC, I wanted to study musical theater and political science. I ended up majoring in something totally different. So, but I was really interested in political theater. And I mean, we didn't really do a lot of like, I mean, Mean Girls started in DC when I was there, right? So it was like, there were fun shows to see for sure. But most of the shows that were being programmed were like very political plays. I mean, we didn't see plays like, Table 17, which I loved, seeing and working on, and it was so much fun. Like, we didn't see plays like that being programmed in DC necessarily. And so I think a lot of my dramaturgy is based in like political theater for sure, and feeling like theater really has to say something for it to be done. And I think now I'm starting to realize like theater can be a little bit more fun, and that's great. And there's a lot of power to that. I always viewed theater as a very political source of artistic expression. So I think DC really shaped that. I also went to school in DC like right when Trump was elected. And so
Mhm.
the arts felt, extremely volatile at that time, but also like we really have to say something super important because theater, could change everything. As being in New York, I feel like my understanding of theater has just grown a lot and my taste has grown a lot. I've seen so many shows here and so many groups that I don't know, I learned about in college and now suddenly I'm working on those shows or that, like I'm going and seeing them and that feels crazy. It's definitely grown from every place that I've been in.
What you said about political theater is very interesting. I think about like the most impactful experiences I've had at the theater, and you and I both like are very passionate about politics. And I look back at like I saw Falsettos like a week after the 2016 election, and we both saw Ragtime the day after.
That was so intense.
Yeah,
Do
the
you
day.
remember?
Yes, we
We
sobbed.
were sobbing.
Right, and I think that those are the moments. Like I can bring myself back to both of those moments and exactly how I felt. And I think that that theater is so valuable. Yes, it doesn't always need to be that heavy, but when it is, it's lightning in a bottle. For you, as someone who like working at the Kennedy Center was such an important part in your career as an intern, and I feel like you look back on that experience so fondly, like what this moment means to you.
That was a really interesting experience, especially now, given the political climate that we're working in. And I worked and I met so many amazing people who worked at the Kennedy Center, and I really loved the cohort that I grew up with. I mean, some of the people that I interned with are now working in the industry alongside me, and that's really exciting. So I don't know, I have a lot of mixed feelings about what's going on, obviously, and I really feel for the people that work there because, I mean, everybody in DC right now is losing their job. So many people are, it's just so the idea of like, oh, you can just leave this organization and work somewhere else. Like, I wish that was true, but for so many people there, it's not really a possibility, especially since, I mean, jobs in the arts in DC are finite already. So the idea of, I don't know, just packing up and going somewhere else when already like there's just a limited job supply. I don't know. It's a really challenging thing for anybody to do. So I really feel for a lot of the people that work there. And I always just want to encourage everyone, like, if you think that you hate what's going on at the Kennedy Center right now, imagine the people who are working there. Like, I promise you, they hate it 10 times more. So I don't know. I don't know if they're if the PR team is listening. Please know I love you. And I'm really sorry that you have to deal with this every day. It sucks.
And I think it's also a tough thing to see like shows navigating. Like you look at Parade and they still performed at the Kennedy Center, and that's such a political show about race and class and all the things that make America so complicated. And I understand the feeling of like wanting to stay and fight, but also the feeling of the people that are just like devastated by what's happening and like they can't move away from it. And I think something I really admire about you too is the fact that you are creative in so many different ways. So beyond just being a dramaturg, like you also write. And I think this industry runs off of people having their hand in a million different pots at once. And I'm curious how you navigate engaging in your creativity and creative projects without it feeling like a chore or just like even leading to burnout.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I mean, it's something I'm still sort of navigating. There are certain times where I definitely have to take a step back. Like, I don't know, I haven't really made many videos this week, but I've definitely like been writing a lot and I've been doing this and I've been seeing a lot of shows. And, there's that whole old saying that says like do something artistic for yourself every single day. And I try my best to do that. Honestly, I think it's just remembering why you love it. I know that's like really cheesy. For me, I find like hope in the most simplest things when it comes to theater, and I know that looks different for everybody, but that's what I try to do.
And I think the key there is like creative for yourself, like knowing that it comes back to like fulfillment in the process and not necessarily like loving whatever the outcome is. And so
Totally.
a huge part of your creativity is being a dramaturg. And I would love if you could kind of like explain to the audience what dramaturgy is, because I think it's so niche and you taught me so much about it. And also like how you discovered that it was going to be your window into theater.
Oh God, that's such a great question. I mean, dramaturgy looks different for every single person. Like it's an impossible thing to explain or describe. For me, I mean, dramaturgy has always been about, and my mentor says this a lot, Lauren Halverson. She's an incredible dramaturg. She always says that dramaturgy is a resource. And I try to implement that into my practice every single day. Like, how can I be a resource to you? How can I be helpful in the room? What do you need from me? That's always a question that I ask every playwright that I work with. And I think dramaturgy too, like, I mean, sometimes it's working personally with a playwright and being like, hey, here's what works in your script, or like, what do you need from me? That's the first question I ask any playwright that I work with. I'm like, what do you need? Do you need me to like tell you, what I like about this? Do you need me to tell you that like where the areas are? Like what is most helpful to you at this stage in your creative process? Yeah, I mean, dramaturgy in the most basic term, it's a study of dramatic composition. So you're really looking at like what works in a story. And there's this really amazing dramaturg named Eleanor Fuchs, who's no longer with us. And I know every single dramaturg is probably going to roll their eyes when I say this. She wrote this essay called A Visit to a Small Planet. And she really believed that, like, each play is its own planet that you inhabit. And so, like, what is the temperature of this play? What is the environment? Like, what does it look like? What are all of these, so it's just like figuring out, like, what is the planet that you are visiting when you are seeing a play. I think so often people are like, well, this doesn't really make sense and this wouldn't happen in the real world. And it's like, well, yeah, because like sometimes worlds that you see on stage are not the worlds that, I don't know, we inhabit in our everyday life. And there's something really magical about that, right? Like sometimes we're seeing a musical where people are singing the story they're in, right? And that doesn't really make sense. And like we don't break out into song, but like that's the world that the show is inhabiting. So figuring that out for every single play that you're seeing is really important. And it can also be such a beautiful insight into the world. For me, I mean, my dramaturgy has always been defined by the digital space. During the pandemic, I just realized there were so many people. I mean, they were all talking about musicals online, and that was really beautiful to see, but there weren't many people talking about plays. And I really loved reading plays when I was in college, and that was something that I continued to be interested in. And I think, being, a young theater artist, there weren't many plays that I could see when I was living in LA because they were all so far away. And so I really relied on like reading things. Like I was reading all these acting books, I was reading all these history books about theater. And so that was my introduction into theater. And so I think during the pandemic, I don't know, there were so many people saying like, oh, like how can we still love theater? And it was like for me, it was like, well, yeah, like I always knew how to like make it work, even if I couldn't go out and see a show or be a part of a show. That was sort of the thing that I was really excited by and I wanted to explore further during the pandemic. And so I think that my dramaturgy has always been like, yeah, how can I be a resource to other people? How can I show them that like the things they want to find are available online? It's not ridiculous to ask like all of these questions about theater, right? Like you're not stupid for not knowing this because the reality is like arts education in this country is very minimal and it's getting worse and worse every single day. And
I would say also, I think something unique to your experience that I just thought of is you started with the text. You started with just reading. And I think a lot of people, like myself included, like I fell in love with theater of like the razzle dazzle, the spectacle, like seeing it on stage. And I think as you talk about your experience, like so much of it was just like organically loving the source material. That's why you're so good at what you do. You're doing the fundamentals. When you haven't seen a show on stage, it's hard for people to like conceptualize what that looks like. And
Mhm.
if you're attached to the words on the page, that is such a different experience. Like you can have a bad book of a musical, but if there's razzle dazzle, like people will say it's like fun and camp and all the things that it is. But if you're focused on the core of it and just reading it without all of that, it's a lot easier to spot. And so, since this podcast does also talk about fashion, I think part of that world building when you have something on stage is costumes. And I'm
For
curious,
sure.
like in your dramaturgy, do you feel like that's an overlooked part? Do you feel like that's like a fun part that really like taps you into a show?
No, I think it's so interesting. I'm really fascinated by costume design because whenever I'm in these like part of my job is going to the first rehearsal, right? And introducing myself to the creative team and letting them, like hearing their thoughts on what the show is going to be and what it's going to look like. Whenever we have those conversations, I'm always intrigued to hear what the costume designer has to say because sometimes it's the most, I mean, it's these small details that maybe you don't even necessarily notice, but like it makes all of the impact. And I really do believe the costume designers are some of the most intelligent people in the room. Like the things that they're coming up with. I mean, they're so smart and so sort of like, I mean, you wouldn't notice it, but it really does have an impact on you. You know what I mean? Like I worked on this show where it was a bunch of like young queer people playing these young boys in high school. And I remember there were people talking about how they wanted to make the pants, pleated because they wanted it to almost look like a skirt, but still feel masculine within that framework. And I thought that was really interesting, right? That was something that like I hadn't even thought about. And then when I saw the show, getting to see that, on stage and seeing these actors fully embody that, like it was such a treat. And that's really to show you like the dramaturgy of not only the play, but also like, I mean, that's something that queer performers have been doing for decades, right? Like we saw that at the Wow Cafe. We saw people, finding ways to like make masculine clothing feminine and vice versa, right? And so we see how the history is also, I don't know, informing the present in these moments. And I think that's really beautiful. And so yeah, dramaturgy definitely influences costume design. And I don't know, we see that with even the ways that like playwrights dress too, right? Like I see so many playwrights trying to emulate the playwrights that came before them, and you can totally see their influences and their artistic influences in the way that they dress as well.
Totally. And okay, you made me think of so many things. First thing it made me think of is Paul Tazwell talked about the costume design for the Wicked movie, and
Hmm.
he was talking about how in all of their costumes at Shiz, their seams will line up, but Elphaba's don't. So she'll be wearing
Mhm.
a pattern and the seams don't line up, just as a reflection of like she doesn't fit. Like she is just a little off kilter, and her seams to like a stripe or something like that, they don't match. And I think that's something I would literally never notice in the movie, but you can feel it. There's something not tangible about it, and I think that's the brilliance. And obviously, like Paul Tesla won for best costume design for Death Becomes Her this year for the Tonys and like is so talented. But that kind of like attention to detail is so dramaturgical. And
Right?
I think back to you're gonna eat this up. You're the biggest John Proctor stan I know. But
Yes, yes. That is
Finestraza,
my brand.
yeah, everything. Everything you need
Hmm.
to know about Grace is in John Proctor. But
Hmm.
basically, Finestraza was talking, and I mentioned this in a past podcast, about how she is also a visual artist. And before
Hmm.
she takes on a role, she'll paint what she sees her character to be. And so she made a painting of what she thought her character was going to dress and look like in John Proctor. And then when she got her costume, it was so similar to exactly what she had drawn and visualized. And I think that's just a testament to the reason why this production was so magical is they were all speaking the same language. And if you have
Hmm.
someone that's just like artistically visualizing themselves as a performer, and then the costume designer unintentionally had not spoken to them about like what they created at all, is also creating something in that vein, you know that there's such a synergy there.
Totally. What's also really exciting about costume design and design in general is that like you're seeing all of these elements come together for one performance, right? It's not just like the actors on stage or the text. It's like the directing and everything else. I mean, it's this impossible experiment where you're seeing every single art form combine into one. And so I think that's something that's really exciting to see on stage and also kind of terrifying because you don't know if it's going to work out. It's a great big experiment and sometimes it fails and sometimes it's beautiful and you never know what you're going to get, but it's exciting nonetheless.
And I have something I really want you to talk about. But basically, for those
For
that don't
sure.
know, The Great Gatsby went public, and there were two productions that started. There's The Great Gatsby that's currently on Broadway, and then there was another production of Great Gatsby that started at the same time that is like very gritty and like a completely different take and a very political take on the times. That was With Music by Florence and the Machine's Florence. And it happened in Boston at ART. And I think when you came home from seeing that production, like all you could talk about was like the way they used costumes as such like an effective theater tool. And I'd love for you to just kind of people were dying to see that show, and you're like one of the only people I know that actually got to go see it. So if you have any like perspective on like what made that so special.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I remember there were a bunch of, I mean, the entire ensemble was dressed in like silvery, sort of like contemporary wear. I don't know. It was very like, it felt very industrial and very shiny and glitzy and glamorous. Not necessarily the 20s, a little bit the 20s, but like also not. I don't know. It just felt very like industrial age. You know what I mean? Like we are advancing in society. But then at the bottom of their clothing, they had like a bunch of like they had dirt underneath them. And then it like kept I don't know, the dirt got more and more, I don't know, it just got higher onto their costumes and it sort of like took over at one point. And I thought that was a really beautiful thing to see on stage because I don't know, you saw like the bottom of their garments and it was like covered in this like disgusting, dirty, like substance. I don't know. It did not look good with the silver going on up top. You were like, this totally clashes, but also like that's sort of the point, right? The idea that like we are not made to operate in this way, this idea of seeing like the new age versus the old age and what that really looks like. And so it felt like a really beautiful way of commenting on class and that time period, how everything started to advance and what that meant for the worker, right? Like you had to work twice as hard to get to where you wanted to be. And there weren't necessarily avenues for you to do that. And yet, like, yeah, more people were becoming wealthy and that was great. But like, you know, if you were somebody like Myrtle's husband, right? Somebody who's like a hardworking dude, it's frustrating when you see all of these new people like advance in society and you're like, I'm still doing my same job and people are saying that it's no longer a value or of worth. And I'm still being seen as like a poor, you know, unfortunate soul. I really appreciated that, you know, that team really found a way to comment on the class relationships between all of the characters because I think that's the most important thing you can really talk about with a Great Gatsby. I mean, there's so many things, right? But for me, I love to talk about class in theater, so I'm always like very interested in how theater explores that even further.
And I would even say I didn't see the production, but based on like the rundown you gave me, like I would even think of like using the metals as like an armor for these people that are
Mhm.
higher in society. No matter how much armor you wear, like the dirt and like the dirty insides are always going to seep through, and you can't hide that no matter what. And so
Totally.
it's such an interesting commentary versus like, yes, the Broadway Great Gatsby is so much fun and like so glitzy, so glamorous, but it's just the opposite take. And so that feels like so rooted in the costume and like the world that they each individually built.
When I will say, The Great Gatsby is one of those shows where like nobody can agree what it's actually about or what it's
Hmm.
supposed to be. Like it was really funny. I saw the elevator repair service 8-hour production called Gats, where they read
Right.
the entirety of The Great Gatsby and they like perform the entire play in front of you. And I remember talking to my uncle about it, who loves The Great Gatsby too, and he like has written extensively about it. He's an editor. He's just like a very well-read, intelligent literature kind of person, and he like really hated that production. And for me, I felt like it really nailed the book in my own sort of perspective, but he could not stand that production. And I thought it was so interesting because I was like, most people that I talk to who love the book like really love that production, and he felt the complete opposite. And then I remember talking to the people who did the Broadway production, and they loved that production, even though I would say, and I think they would agree, like their production is totally different
Right.
from that version, right? So it's like there's so many things that you can draw out of that text, and I think that's why it continues to be relevant today. But it's so interesting to me to see like just how much there really is in there.
Right. And that's the sign of good art anyway, is if it's making a conversation and no one can necessarily pinpoint exactly what they're trying to tell you because it's so rooted in your own perspective.
For sure.
And it seems like in this day and age, a lot of those kind of intellectual conversations or just like really interesting work is happening off Broadway. And you love an off Broadway moment more than I
I really
know.
do.
And so I would love if you could talk about like what makes that world so special to you and kind of like the original art that you're seeing there that's not necessarily the same conversations happening on Broadway.
Yeah, so my first encounter with off Broadway was when I was in high school. My friend Benji, he did his senior project and he came back to school. He had the script. He was like, "You have to read it." I go, "What is it called?" He goes, "It's called An Octoroon. It's by this playwright named Brandon Jacobs Jenkins. Basically, it's about this black playwright who puts on whiteface." And I was like, "That sounds horrible. I don't know why you would ever support that. That sounds incredibly problematic. What the heck is going on here?" And he was like, "Just give it a chance.
Hmm.
Like, just read it." And so I did, and I thought it was the most bombastic, insane thing I had ever read in my life. And I was like, first of all, people are writing plays. That's crazy. Second of all, where did this happen? And then I found out the show was first staged at Soho Rep, this really, really small, amazing theater off Broadway. I mean, it was like basically like a storefront theater at that time. And they did it in this really small space. It completely sold out. And people became obsessed with the play, and now people are teaching that play in class. I mean, it was something that when I came to college, we saw Gloria, Brandon's other play, at Woolly Mammoth, where they just staged an octoroon. And yeah, I just fell in love with his work, and then I fell in love with all of the other work that I was seeing in these sort of like small intimate spaces that in DC theater. And a lot of these shows originally started off Broadway, and so I was really interested in learning more about those spaces and what work they were presenting. And so when I came to New York, I really got to know a lot of those theaters intimately, not only through work, but also just by going all the time. And I think there's something really special about going to a small theater and seeing something so intimate with a small group of people. Like the idea, I mean, listen, I think it's really important to make theater accessible. I think these Broadway spaces where there are 400 to 500 seats, like those are incredible experiences, right? Like I'm so glad we had a play like John Proctor's A Villain on Broadway and that it could sell out to as many people as it did. And I'm so glad that people still felt connected to it despite how big the house was, right? Like that's a testament of an amazing play. And also just like it's crazy that something like that did so, right? Like it's awesome. I think there have been so many amazing and like special and unique shows presented in these small houses, delivering these, for lack of a better word, intimate messages, right? Like messages that directly affect you, right? That you're really not going to see anywhere else. I think the idea of like a lot of people talk about bootleg culture, right? Like we want to make sure theater is accessible. We want to make sure everybody can see it. And of course that's true, right? But there's also something really special about, I don't know, like entering a theater and being able to say like me and 30 other people know what happened here and we're all leaving and nobody else knows what's going on.
It's a
You know what I
religious
mean?
experience. It's like a sanctuary. It's like a ritual. It's like I'm going to come here to be moved. And I feel like so much of what I've seen off Broadway, even just in the last year, those are the things that have like moved me that I'm still thinking about to this day. And
Totally.
that intimacy is hard to replicate.
Well, and a lot of that work too, it's like you're seeing these playwrights come up with things that haven't even really like reached popular conversation yet. I think people always talk about like, oh yeah, like theater is dying and isn't it awful and like it's a miracle that it's still alive, right? Like when film came around, so that should have been a wrap on all of us, but we decided to continue to do it and we're all still like going and seeing it. And I think that's really telling, right? That people want to gather in a space, that they want to turn off their phones and listen to somebody else speak for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. Like it's a miracle that anybody even wants to do that in the first place. I think that really speaks to like just the power of live theater, not to be cheesy about it, but it's true.
And I think people have been talking about this all year about like Oh Mary's trajectory and like how it's so wild that they even made it to Broadway, let alone have become like this success. And I think that's also a testament to good work will work. And you
Mhm.
look at even like I think about title of show. If you guys aren't familiar with title of show, it's literally a show about creating a show. And it made it to Broadway. It was this tiny little show that could, and you think about all these instances that shows that shouldn't make it do, and they don't have to be the exception to the rule. If we give people time to build an audience, like there is such an impact to having stories that aren't necessarily like the most commercial on Broadway. And you look at, like you were saying with Brandon Jacob Jenkins, like he had Appropriate with Sarah Paulson on Broadway, which was a huge success. And then this year he had Purpose with Carrie Young. And it's like you're fostering these talents off Broadway that bring such important stories forward. And plus, like you were saying, like off Broadway talent, you look at people who are killing it on Broadway right now. Like Jennifer Samard was an off-Broadway queen for like years and years and years doing like the most zany, like kooky work. And now she's a massive star, like leading lady on Broadway. And it's such an incubator for people that maybe aren't conventional or what you expect. And so I think it's really cool to see how much it's influenced your taste. And I feel like you've opened my eyes a lot because now I like all the shows that I want to see right now are off Broadway.
Oh, I'm so glad. No, there are so many amazing shows off Broadway, and I really think I mean, it's just like the caliber of work that you see there. It's just nice to go into a theater. And I'm not saying this about like any other form of theater, right? I'm really not trying to like disrespect Broadway in any sort of way, but like
Right.
most times when I go to like an off Broadway or an off Broadway theater, I just feel like they respect my intelligence. There's this like they trust that I'm going to be able to follow along, that I'm not just somebody who's going to like passively let whatever go. They really trust that
They're
I
not,
am actively engaging and I am listening. And I think that like
they don't have to
um
feed you the answer to the narrative.
yeah, and I would say across the board, right? With like when you watch TV now, when you watch movies, there are a lot of producers that are so scared you're not going to get it. And
Hmm.
I think what's really exciting about, I don't know, staging something in front of 50 to 60 people, like you're just going to see if they get it or not, you know? Like you're just going to throw it up there and hopefully they do. And if they don't, better luck next time, you know? There's something really exciting about that when we look at off Broadway and off Broadway work, historically speaking. I mean, you can look at almost any Broadway show and you can see remnants of off Broadway theater from like the 70s,
Hmm.
right? In like modern contemporary musical theater. Those are not two different conversations. They are conversations that are happening all together. I just read this amazing book by this incredible academic where he said the best theater artists are observant of its tradition. And I think that's really true. And we can see that in the work they make.
Another book to plug. I just finished reading Jeffrey Seller's book Theater Kid, which
Oh
sure,
my
of
God,
course,
amazing.
I read this. So for those who don't know, Jeffrey Seller was the producer of Rent. He produced In the Heights, Hamilton, and you look at Rent starting off Broadway and New York Theater Workshop, it like finding its own voice, coming to Broadway and completely undoing the landscape of what people thought could be on Broadway. And you look at Hamilton, the same thing, off Broadway at the Public. Yes, it was coming in with Lynn already having success, but these like once in a generation shows that really alter the landscape are all being developed there. And I don't think that's a
Totally.
coincidence. I know a lot of your community that you've built in New York is also from having a TikTok voice and a voice for off-Broadway. So I would love for you to talk about like, did you feel pressure to find a niche because that's like such a buzzword in like the influencer space? And how did you navigate that pressure?
I feel like I entered the TikTok space because I was like, I need to fill this niche. It wasn't necessarily like I need to be this niche. It was just like nobody else is talking about this really weird show that's happening in a storefront theater off Broadway,
Right.
and I want to be the person to do that. And then it's sort of, I don't know, escalated from there. And it's been really exciting to see other creators, join in on the app and find ways to talk about it too. I think it's really exciting to see those voices expand and to also see like a lot of Broadway influencers go to off-Broadway shows now because they know I'm gonna give them shit if they don't, And so,
Okay,
um,
trendsetter.
yeah, what can I say? No, I mean, like literally, it's just, I mean, there's so much good work off Broadway, and so I think what's also really exciting about the influencer space, and I've heard a lot of critics talk about this, from their perspective when they first started. They talk about how there used to be this like breeding ground of, for lack of a better word, of young critics who would like go out and see a bunch of shows and they were like hungry to find the next hot thing, and everybody was like so competitive about finding the next hot thing. And I really do feel like a lot of influencers, we all sort of feel the same way, right? Like a bunch of us went to the Edinburgh Fringe like 2 years ago or something, and I remember, my friends would recommend shows and I would be like, okay, but I saw this show that none of you guys saw and it's really good and you have to go check it out, because I desperately wanted to find the next hot thing. That also just makes us like better
Champions for the
theater.
art form.
Totally. You can see all of these things and you can figure out like, okay, which tastes do I align with most? And like, what are the things that I'm personally interested in? And
Totally. And it's also a lot more accessible, like financially. Like
yeah,
I feel like a lot of times the way people feel about a Broadway show ticket is like, yes, there are great ways to like get inexpensive tickets, but you kind of want to know what you're going into if you're going to invest so much money and time into it. But in the off-Broadway space, I feel like there's so much room for just like getting a ticket, seeing where it goes, and you don't have to feel like it's such an investment. And I'm also curious for you how social media has like opened up community for you and how you've built a very specific group of people that care about such like passionate, intellectual, interesting things and what that's meant to you. Because I'm sure growing up, like maybe not all of your friends were as passionate about these things as you.
it's been such a cool thing to be a part of. Like when I first moved to New York City, I didn't really know many people. Like I had my friends from school, but we were all like working in our own sort of fields and trying to figure things out. And I met so many people through TikTok and through Twitter. And so I really made some amazing friends through my platform, which was really cool. And I also got to make some friends just like, I don't know, from people who like follow me, right? Like that's the cool thing is that a lot of artists that I've been able to see, like they've also, been following me, which is crazy, right? Like I'll see an amazing show. I saw this incredible show called Berlindia, and I remember talking to like the director after the show, and I realized like, oh, wait, we've been following each other on Twitter for like years now, and you just directed this incredible play that I'm learning about for the first time. That's crazy. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's really cool to be able to see that. Like these really talented people think I have something that's worthwhile to say. That's insane to me. And I don't know. I mean, there have been some theaters that I've walked into where I'm like, oh my God, I'm so lame. I don't know like why I'm here. Like I don't know enough. I don't feel smart enough. I don't feel like whatever, right? Like we all feel a
Imposter
sense of
syndrome.
imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
Totally. And, I remember like going to this really cool theater in Brooklyn feeling that way. And I turned around and this guy was like, don't I follow you on TikTok? And I was like, yeah, no. I maybe I don't know. Yeah, that's me. And then now, like he's one of my really great friends. I mean, we went to like, a concert this weekend and I saw him there and we were like dancing the whole time. You know what I mean? So it's like it's been a really cool way for me to meet other artists and to connect with people. Being my age, like, yes, I'm 27 and that's old in some spaces, but also like it's really like honestly fairly young for the industry. And so the idea that I've been able to work with the playwrights that I've been able to work with because of this platform, it's really, I mean, it's genuinely insane that like any of them listen to me and that they want to hear my artistic opinion. Like that's crazy. The internet really gives you that opportunity to foster those connections. And it makes and it's really one of those things where I think a lot of people they like to believe it's impossible to be a leader in theater or it's impossible to have a
Voice.
voice in theater. For me, I've just realized just by being on the internet, it's like it's actually like fairly easy because there aren't many people who feel confident enough to like say what they want to say about theater and with good reason because it's an industry that is very volatile and people are not necessarily open to hearing your opinions all the time. But I think if you're somebody who wants to guide any sort of conversation, like it is possible to do that in a compassionate way online. You may stumble along the way. I certainly have, but I definitely think like you can still find your voice online and still find a way to like navigate these really important conversations that we should be having in the industry, especially if they're conversations that impact you and your community.
And I think it is a great equalizer. It's allowing anyone who is passionate enough to have an opinion or passionate enough to like know what's going on in the landscape, a moment that they can share how they feel and what they're thinking about. And so you don't have to necessarily work in the industry. Like I feel like so many of your theater influencer friends also have jobs in completely different industries, and this is such an outlet for them. And not to be like a New York supremacist, but I think it is really affirming to like live in a city where people care about the same things that you care about and want to have like these critical conversations. And like I think just living in New York, it's so part of the zeitgeist. And I have friends that like don't care about theater, but they're telling me about like the next casting and they're like, oh my God, need to see Jane Krakowski and O'Mary. And I'm like, yes, you do. Like that's amazing. And it's so in the fabric. The community part of it can be so underestimated because of like there's so much toxicity online and all those feelings, but it really also can foster a really beautiful corner.
There are so many people who are also able to tell their stories in ways that maybe they haven't before. Like, I
Mhm.
think for so long, like people have not necessarily known what it's like to be working in both sides of the industry. And, that's now becoming a very normal thing. And so getting to hear from young people like, hey, here's what the audition process is really like,
Mm,
or hey, this is what it's
transparency.
really like to work, at the box office every single day. And here are the challenges that I face. Like, I think it's a really nice call to action for the industry at large, right? It really makes us remember like what are the things that we still need to work on and what are things that people are not necessarily impressed by and like what can we do to make conditions better?
The transparency feels groundbreaking. I see that like even in people that like I went to high school with and they're like auditioning in the city and they're posting about it and it makes you realize not everyone is plucked out of college and put in a leading role. Like Stephanie J. Block, one of my favorite Broadway performers literally of all time, didn't
Oh,
make
we know.
I did just buy a ticket for the day I land home for Thanksgiving to go see her in concert
Well,
again.
of course. Of
And
course. You
just for
wouldn't be you without that.
just for the listeners, just so you guys know, I will be seeing Stephanie J. Block with my mom, her best friend Carol, famously feisty Carol, and
Oh,
Carol's
yes.
96-year-old mother, Irma. So that will be my Stephanie J. Block squad, and that feels right. But
An iconic squad.
yes, and her podcast, Stages Podcast, shout out, is another big
Shout
reason
out.
I have a podcast.
Major shout out. Yeah.
But
Big
back to
fan.
the point of this, she didn't make it on Broadway until her 30s. And I feel like
Mhm.
there's such like an instant gratification culture. People think like, oh, I'm gonna shoot out of Michigan and I'm gonna be on Broadway. And that's not the experience. You only see the people that are successful. And I think TikTok and other social medias are really like pulling back the curtain of what it means to actually get to those high points.
No, it's so true. And I think too, it's like we're learning about so many people's different paths that they take. I mean, there are so many successful playwrights and directors, Whitney White, Claire Barron, people who like started out as actors and
Mhm.
now they're like, like Pulitzer Prize finalist playwrights, or they're, like directing these incredible big shows on Broadway. Like you just never know where your path is going to take you. I know for me, like when I was in college, my senior year, I was applying for almost every single fellowship out there, right? And I really wanted to be a dramaturg. That was something that I was super interested in. And I wanted to be working in a literary office reading scripts because I was reading scripts all the time. But I mean, every single place that I applied to, like nobody asked for an interview, nobody cared to learn more. Like, you know what I mean? It was just like, it was an impossible thing for me to break into. And I remember feeling really like down about that and feeling like, oh, nobody believes in me and I don't know what I'm going to do. And then, like, suddenly, I don't know, the pandemic happened and I started posting my thoughts online and people were following and listening. And now it's so interesting because I'll look at like my follower list and the people who didn't even care to interview me are now like following me on social media. And then like, oh, right, like there's so many situations where like people just don't know what you're doing and they don't really know like how your brain, like it has nothing to do with you. You really have to go out there and advocate for yourself and make your own opportunities because nobody's going to be making them for you. When I was in college, there was this amazing like senior when I was a junior who literally went out in front of the entire Department of Performing Arts, and she was like pretty drunk that night. It was like the
Sure.
first night, where you're introducing yourself to the freshmen, and all the seniors gave like one piece of advice, and she was like, nobody's gonna fucking make opportunities for you, so you have to go and you have to like bust the door open and you have to tell them who you are, make these opportunities for yourself. And it was so transformative for me to hear that. When you're in college theater, you can relate to that, right? The idea that like you've been there, you've been auditioning, you've been putting in the work, but sometimes they only see you as the freshman that you were 4 years ago, and like how are you supposed to change what they think about you? But it's like you got to make those opportunities and show them what they're missing out on, because like nobody else is going to be doing that for you. So I think that's a really important lesson for everyone to learn.
100%. And I think the greatest creative outlets are born out of like a desperation to share your creative energy. I mean, that's what this podcast
Totally.
is. It's such a liberating thing of like, you don't need permission to create. And you don't need someone to hand you something that's already been created in order to mean something.
Yeah. Well, and I was talking to a friend of mine who was telling me about the origins of Almost Maine. Did you ever see
John
that show?
Cariani, My Something Rotten Cake. I've
Yes.
never
Oh my
seen
God, he's
it,
amazing.
but
Oh, it's
basically,
such a great play.
for backdrop, John Cariani was in Something Rotten on Broadway, hilarious comedic
So
actor.
good.
And then also just like wrote this prolific play that like every college does now called Almost Maine.
Yeah, I mean, basically every college, every high school has done it across the country. And he initially wrote that play because his friends and him, like, they just didn't have jobs. They weren't getting cast by anybody. And so they were like, he was like, let me just write this play because I'm so done with the idea that, like, I don't know, like, we're not getting cast. And so he wrote it, and then an off-Broadway theater produced it. Now it's being done everywhere, and it's a crowd pleaser. You know what I mean? If you don't like Almost Maine, I don't know what's wrong with you. Like, it is such a cute little story. And so I say all that to be like, you never know what's going to be the thing that, explodes and becomes something, right? Like, he wrote that play because he was just irritated with the industry and wanted to see roles that, embodied him and his friends. And that's where it came from, and like even Rent too. I mean, like,
I was
Jonathan
just about
Larson
to
wrote
say,
that because he was like, I want to see my friends on stage, and these are the friends that I have. And so yeah, like being able to capture that is just there's such a talent to that, but also like a sense of like, I want to, get this out there.
final question we always ask people is what would you want your signature stamp to be on the industry? Before you answer that, though, something I know is very important to you is disability representation in theater. And I feel like that is so part of your purpose and coincides with your signature stamp. So I would love for you to just one kind of talk about why that's so important to you and maybe even spotlight a theater company or like a creator that you think is talking about this in a really meaningful way.
I think for me, I mean, like, I find it really interesting the conversations we have about disability in the theater industry, because disability often looks like one thing. And I actually think there's so much more progress we can make when we realize that there's not just one form of disability out there, right? It's not always like a visible thing. It can also be invisible. It can also be mental. It can be addiction. It can be so many different
Mhm.
things. And I think by doing that, it's not to eliminate one form of disability over the other or whatever it may be. It's actually to like open the doors and be like, oh, we're all impacted by this. I think there's so many amazing artists out there that are really exploring that even further. I mean, I think about artists like Ryan Haddad, who I love with all of my heart. I mean, he's somebody who he literally knows like every disabled person in New York City. Like, I always say, like, there are certain people in the community who just know everyone. Like, for me, I do know almost every type 1 diabetic in California. You know what
Okay,
I
it's
mean? Like,
like
I do.
it's
No,
Jewish
like I do.
geography. It's Jewish geography, but like based on whatever experience you
Totally.
have.
Totally. Like, when you're in the community, you know. And he's somebody who just, I mean, he has found a way to make his performances almost entirely accessible. I mean, of course, every performance can be more accessible, but like he'll include, closed captioning, he'll include like, audio description into his plays, and he finds a way to incorporate that into the form of his work
Mm.
that makes it purposeful and beautiful and like also just accessible. And I think every disabled artist, every American disabled artist for sure, will be looking to him if they're not already looking to him now. And I think for me, like, to answer your question about like my stamp on, I don't know, the industry or what I do, like my dramaturgy being defined by this digital space, I think it is intrinsically a disabled sort of way of exploring theater, right? I just want to see like how it works and how can we sort of unpack that and how can we explore that further. And those are the things that I'm interested in. I want to like
Mhm.
actually look at the piece as a fully nuanced thing rather than just like this is what's wrong with it and this is what's right about it, because I don't think that's interesting or helpful at all. I just think that's honestly dismissive.
Mhm.
So approaching everything with a sincere level of care, I guess that is what I want to be known for.
One thing I do want to spotlight before we go is I told you about that I saw Deaf Theater's production of Waitress at Lincoln Center. And
Yes. What do you think?
it was amazing. Like it
Yeah.
rocked my world. And it was completely free. And basically they had the music of Waitress like playing behind the performers, and then they would sign as part of their choreography. And so the audience was almost entirely either people who are deaf or companions of people who are deaf. And so to watch them get to experience theater in that way was one so moving, just of like watching the audience watch something that I think is so special. And then also like them getting to be involved in the process and all of like the specifics. Like they had these sensory vests on where they could like feel the music and like how and all these things that like I, as someone who's hearing, would not have necessarily thought of. And I think
Mhm.
the key to all of this is like don't wait for the community to like be your teacher, but also like talk to the community and see what they need, because they're going to be the ones that know, instead of someone prescribing, oh, this is how we're going to be accessible.
Yeah. Well, and also acknowledging too that like what may be accessible for one group may not be accessible for another. And also that like there are going to be people in your audience or in your performance group that have like opposing access needs. That happens all the time in disabled spaces where it's like you're doing something that's actually so like bothersome for me, right? That like I mean, I've been in spaces where like I don't know, like my pump will make noises and like there are other disabled people there who will be like, that's actually like so distracting to me and I can't stand it, right? But like that to me is one of the most beautiful things about disability is how it's like, yeah, we're all sort of lumped into this group together, but like we are all so intrinsically different. Understanding that too is something that I don't know, I hope the theater industry can appreciate more in the future.
I hope so. And I cannot thank you enough for being here, Grace.
Oh
This
my
felt
God, of
like,
course. Thank you for having me. I hope this was good.
tell me this doesn't remind you of like, I feel like when we would come back from a show and maybe we saw the same show that night or maybe we saw a different show and we would just like flow our thoughts and ideas for like an hour. And this feels so similar to that. Of what you're saying has changed a lot of my perspective. And so I hope it like opens up other people's understanding of like what theater can be.
Oh my God, I hope so. No, I totally agree. Those are some great nights.
Thank you so much, Grace. You are the best. You are the greatest. And thank you all for listening. It's been such a treat.